All right. Good morning and welcome to Conversations on Retail. My name is Matt Pfeiffer, and we are so excited to continue Mike Graen's series focused on-shelf availability. It is a soggy day in Northwest Arkansas, and we're back from a bit of an extended break from the holidays. And I know Mike has been traveling and hitting conferences and so forth, but we're super excited to be back. Mike's guest today is our friend Myron Burke. He's the founder and CEO of Divergent Technology Advisors, based here in Northwest Arkansas. And the two of them are going to be talking today about the impact of serialized items on retail supply chains. Just a couple of housekeeping issues before we get started. First of all, I want to thank the University of Arkansas. The On-Shelf Availability Group and Series is presented by the Walton Supply Chain Center at the University of Arkansas. You can learn more about the nation's #1 undergraduate supply chain program for the second year in a row using that URL on the screen. I want to also thank our sponsors. We picked up a couple, Mike, over the last couple weeks. But of course, BrainCorp and Barcoding, Vusion, SES and Magatag, Wiliot, they've been with us for some time. But Taopin, a smart label company based in China, as well as Simbi Robotics has joined us recently. So we're so thankful to have their support for this series. In case you missed it, Mike has put up quite a body of work with us, and you can check out all of his past conversations on our YouTube channel. Simply go to youtube.com/@conversationsonretail. Want to remind everyone that this is intended to be a conversation and not a presentation. So as you have questions or insight to offer, even if something is said that's inconsistent with your own experience, we want to hear from you. And you can participate in the conversation simply by clicking on the Q&A button in Zoom and submitting your questions and thoughts and comments in writing. Mike will acknowledge those as there is time and include those in the conversation. Mike also likes for us to include that it's important that we all comply with federal antitrust laws. We're not going to talk about anything related to pricing, margins, discounts, suppliers, timing of price changes, anything along those lines. One last thing is the opinions and recommendations expressed by Mike and his guests are their own and not necessarily those of Conversations on Retail. So before acting on any of those opinions and recommendations, make sure that you always consider their suitability for your own circumstances. So with all the lawyering out of the way, Mike, I'm going to turn it over to you. Thank you so much.
Well, Myron and I have known each other a long, long time. I'm going to let him introduce himself here in a minute, but we go back to the early days when Myron and I was at Procter & Gamble and you were at Walmart. And I think it was around the 2002, 2003, you said, yeah, we're thinking about doing this technology that allows us to track pallets and cases through the supply chain. And you and I had a chance to work back then. And then I got a chance to work with you for many years, which I absolutely enjoyed. Most of it. Some of it was challenging, but that's okay. It made me grow for sure, in a good way. In a good way. We can get into some of those stories later. But Myron, go ahead and introduce yourself to our guests.
Yeah, good morning. It's great to be with you, Mike, and lots of memories there. So briefly, been in Northwest Arkansas since 1999, here with my wife and kids, and spent 26 years with Walmart. An amazing career where I was able to really create my own path through the mentoring of many great leaders. Started in clubs, came into finance and tax compliance, and became a problem solver in those areas of sort of automating redundant work that people don't really want to do for a very long period of time, and built a career out of that, working through the first innovation team. The international assignment was 3 years in Japan. Business process and engineering team. We built that from the ground up.
We're here to talk a little bit about the whole idea of serialized data and serialized supply chain. And Myron has been a huge advocate of this, and just his background of this for years and years. I think we've celebrated the fact that the UPC is now officially 50 years old. And while we recognize that, it has been a huge help for things like looking up, eliminating having to price every individual item and doing inventory and all this stuff. I mean, you can't imagine life without a UPC today. It's been an integral part of what we've had to do. But there is some limitations to the UPC. And one of the limitations is, for years, we've looked at the UPC of an item and the quantity that we have. So I've got a strawberry Pop-Tarts. This is the UPC, and I've got 20 of them, which has been great. But unfortunately, we are moving to a platform that we need to have individual understanding of, not just the fact that we have a UPC and quantity, but we also want to have some attributes about each one of those individual selling units. And so we've talked a lot about RFID and 2D barcodes. We're not going to spend much time talking about those as concepts because those are the way you capture the data, either through scanning it or potentially an RFID one. What we want to spend a little bit of time talking about is the idea of we're moving to a serialization. And I think some people already know this. They've heard of this before. But what does that mean, really? Well, what that means is a couple things. Number one, we still have the basic UPC, which is what is the selling unit. But for each one of the selling units, we're going to have a unique serial number tied to that UPC. Example, I've got 50 strawberry Pop-Tarts. The UPC will be the same, but I will have a unique serial number on each one of those. So I can really identify all 50 are different items, but they all roll up to the same UPC. And we'll show you some of the benefits of that here in a little bit, but I think that's really important. So when you think about that, all of these systems, the legacy systems between suppliers and retailers now have this unique thing, which is the unique serial number, which is tied to every one of the items. So how do we take advantage of that is really the kind of the question. So Myron, anytime you come back, stop me. But what we've got here is we've got two ways that we can do this. One is we can leverage RFID data capture as a way of capturing that unique serial number. And the other one is as part of the GS1 standards for Sunrise 2027, we'll be able to capture that same thing with an actual 2D barcode. What's been the value proposition from your perspective of the UPC? And what do you say is that differentiating value proposition for serialized data? I think that would be helpful to get your perspective.
Yeah, I was thinking about this the other day with my parents, and they've both passed away, but with the barcode being 50 years old, my parents passed away at the age of 80, they spent 30 years of their life without a barcode even as a thought in commerce. And then I sort of grew up when the Garvey gun of sticking price stickers on every single can of soup and every can of soda and things in a grocery store was on its way out. And then we moved into this barcode scanning aspect at point of sale. And I look back, over my generation and think about my parents, and I'm like, if you look at how fast we move product and the level of automation we have through structured symbologies, whether that be the numbers that make up the barcode, the company prefix and the item reference, those numbers at the bottom that get translated into a symbology, whether that's a linear barcode, what could be a QR code, or even things in an RF structure today, without line of sight, we've changed the amount of data that we can flow and the rate at which we can flow data, and enabled machine-to-machine communication on things that used to be human to asset to human communication in every instance. Making a product, boxing a product, shipping a product, unloading a product, stocking a product, checking out a product was all human to product relationships. And today, almost all of those are machine to machine automated. And I think the barcode has enabled the speed of commerce that we have around the world, not just regionally, in a way that I think we've never fathomed before. And I think today with Sunrise 2027, serialized barcodes, and I think this is where it's tough for some folks to get their head around it. We are now actually approaching a generational shift in data and automation capabilities that I believe for 20 years or 30 years of the barcode we didn't believe was even fathomable. And I equate it to sort of the checkbook in an aspect of when you put serialization into it, it's like, oh, I have a check, I have a name on it, I have an account number. Well, but I also have a check number. And that check number, could you imagine writing checks without a check number? I mean, I grew up, my parents had blue and red checks that were counter checks, and they used to use those. It was a pain to track. Now you have check numbers. Can you imagine writing a check without check numbers? And then imagine using a credit card without a security number. And so I think the serial number for product becomes that tertiary check and balance that allows us to add an unlimited number of attributes, an unlimited number of state and status indicators as to the life cycle of that product, the warranty serviceability of that, the authenticity of that, and a lot of things that we'll talk about today. that if you haven't spent time in the space of thinking about it, it is way beyond inventory counting the value of what the serial number brings to the marketplace.
So we've got actually a slide that I've borrowed from GS1. Several of these are GS1 slides, but I think this one's pretty good. It's a pretty broad slide. But okay, so great. So serialized items are basically the UPC and a unique serial number to track and be able to provide attributes for a single item rather than just UPC quantity. Here's a big bunch of broad kind of user cases: inventory management, traceability, et cetera. So, okay, that's great. I have the ability to be able to now serialize items. What are some of the really practical in retail? What are some of the practical in the retail supply chain? What are some of the practical applications for that?
I think as you look at the retail supply chain, obviously inventory shrink, that whole inventory management bucket is such a big deal and a big topic right now. I think it's a big topic because we're running up against some of the gaps in general accounting principles between retail accounting versus cost accounting. And if you think of that, compare Walmart and Target's releases around shrink to Sam's Club and Costco's, they're quite contrasting as to what they're experiencing. Because it becomes accountability to the item level. And what serialization gives us is that accountability to the item level. Beyond inventory, I now have this authenticity. I can authenticate things with the manufacturer and doing that matching. I can do the traceability of where it went in the life cycle, how long it spent at that location, where it may have stopped in the middle by tying a serial number to a pro number on a trailer and connecting the pro number to the GPS on a tractor. And so there's this Internet of Things that starts to connect this in here. And it's not about the case, it's about the actual item unit that a consumer will buy that goes in that case, or maybe didn't go in that case. We've seen situations of where that can be safety related to temperature management on insulin, or in COVID, we saw a lot of things with temperature management on COVID drugs. Safe handling, G-force impacts for potential breakage of things. Internal circuits could be damaged with certain G-force impacts if something was in an accident. Box looks okay, but the product's not. Things like that can be track and traced and warrantied or recalled, and you ensure you get all of those back. The sustainability effort, I think, is probably the most misclassified one. There's a lot of things, and I don't want to dismiss it, but there's a lot of discussion about RFID tags or different types of symbology indicators and say, well, are they sustainable or not? But I think those processors give us the ability to actually track where does packaging go after it's used, and is that getting recycled? With the extended serial number, we can actually link that serial number to how should I handle this type of recyclable versus, trying to train 300 million people in America to read what the recyclable codes mean, and they do change, so they have to change with it. Automating that where I could just scan it and it gives me a disposition with my phone, or I can have a scanner on a trash compactor and it gives me the disposition of, recyclable, non-recyclable, and then tracking that. I think makes a bigger dent in the recyclable and recircular economy than we could ever make just off of, human trust alone, because financials get in the way. I think corporately, financials get in the way. And so being able to track that and trust that becomes very, very opportunistic, both in the recycling of packaging, in the ownership of packaging. There's a lot of companies who make products for, I talk about the oil industry a lot. The oil industry generates oil. They buy most of their packaging, but if you buy a case of motor oil, somebody else, maybe DuPont or somebody, built the package. There's no tracker on the package, but there's a G10 for the oil. Well, who's responsible for the sustainability of that product or the recyclability of that product? It should be both companies, the creator and the person putting product in it. It's a little bit like the DVD industry. When it was around, you were buying content on a disc. The disc was nothing but a media carrier. But the recyclability of those discs became a challenge. And we've moved through that by moving to digital media. But I think there's other products that follow that same work structure that serialization can really help move the needle on. But setting back and thinking this far ahead into the future when, we're still at the early days of sustainability and recycling and how to actually drive true packaging improvements, and understand the P&L cost or impact to those things. I think serialization is what gives us that next level intelligence as to what happens with the billions and billions of water bottles. Where do they end up? How do they end up in, you know, a plastic island in the Indian Ocean? Where does that stuff come from? And some of it's trash that we export because we'd rather deal with it somewhere else in our own country. And that's an unfortunate reality. It's hard to quantify because we don't have that. But again, it gives you this visibility from the authentication at the manufacturer side all the way down to the packaging and the points of safety information. If there's a formulation change and that could create an allergy change, you can actually allow users to scan that and understand it versus reprinting all your packaging. You can actually send alert to known users in your user group from your sales and management CRM devices. So there's lots of interconnectedness that this serial number opens up across all business and commerce channels.
Wow, that's a lot. That's a lot of different opportunity for sure. I thought I put together a couple of examples that might be really helpful that people could relate to, and it's interesting, Myron, because Matt Schob was on the one of the participants of this thing, and he and I kind of talked about this when he was still at Walmart, and you as well. So here's kind of a really live example of what things could be done. You mentioned state and status, and that's really an interesting way of doing this. So what I got here is basically the number 6, the current system thinks I have 6 specific television sets. Let's just call this a Samsung television set, right? I got 6 of them in the store. Well, we all know that that's inventory accuracy is always a challenge. So many retailers are implementing RFID to adjust that on hand to reflect what I actually have. So they do an RFID scan. By the way, RFID by default, by industry standards, is a serialized item. So I count all of those and I go, I really don't have 6, I really have 5. So I really have 5 on hand. However, as you look through these particular items, what you see is some of these items may be in the store, but they're not available for sale. So for example, I may have items that are in damaged locations. A customer has bought a television, didn't work for whatever reason, brought it back into the store, returned it. It's now back in the claims department. It's physically in inventory, but it's really not available for sale. I may have a different display. There's an example here with TVs on a display. They may be showing a movie or whatever. They are in the inventory, but really not available for sale unless somebody wants a discount, et cetera. So you can kind of get down to, well, each one of those have a UPC. I don't know how many I have available for sale. I have a unique serial number. I can tell you each one of the ones that are not available for sale. This one's in claims, and this one's on the display, and this one's maybe moving around the customer's cart. I really only have 1 available for sale. So that's an example, Myron. I think you mentioned state and status, which is I can get down to that unique serial number and go, I'll tell you how many are actually available to go pick up versus how many I have in the store. Example is fair example.
Yeah, I think it's a great example, and one we probably collaborated on, around what was just inventory states, right?
Right.
What I have in the building, and I think there's one that's even missing here as you look at where the digital economy is with, store shoppers and pickup today. There's stuff that's in the inventory system and could be sitting on a shelf that an order picker will pick up and put in a basket. But until that basket gets picked up, that may be sitting in the store inventory, but not available on the shelf. You also have inventory that's in a customer's cart walking around the store while she is shopping that is still in the store inventory, but it's not available for sale. So if 5 people in the store have 1 in their cart, that's 5 units of on hand that are not available for sale, but are still in the inventory system. And so this inventory states concept starts to give you the impression of, hey, what are the different states of inventory that I actually have? And here you've got 5 or 6 different ones on the screen between claims, display, store use, open box. Somebody doesn't want to buy an open box if they want a brand new TV, regardless, because they think it may be missing something or may have an issue. And then what's on hand but not available because it's committed to a customer. And I actually see a day where you can reserve product by serial number for a customer who's willing to pay you in advance for that because there's limited quantity. You can go on and secure that for them and then block that at point of sale. We've seen the same thing in bakery where we've done work where I link the date code to a serial number. So I won't allow anything that has a serial number date code linkage that is today. So I won't allow anything to be scanned that is expiring as of today. So you can start to capture and quantify short dated or outdated product in advance as well. So there's tremendous opportunities to build this inventory states model out, not just across consumer electronics, but even consumer packaged goods and food products.
100%. Great examples. So we're talking a lot about serialization, which is great. What gives me a unique serial number. Talk a little bit about, okay, but in addition to that, whether I use a data capture like RFID or 2D barcode, there's additional attributes that you can assign to this serialized item that you can't assign to the UPC. Give us some examples of that, because I think that would be helpful for the audience as well.
Well, it's, with digital link, that's becoming somewhat of an infinite, and that's a new GS1 standard of digital link. It's becoming a somewhat infinite capability using, the internet and HTML code linkages. What would be either integrated or connected bases within a company. So I can start to manage receipt date. I can look at first in, first out. I can look at last in, first out. So date rotations. I can look at temperatures across travel and put floors or ceilings on that to say, did it ever break a temperature zone? I'd mentioned G-force earlier. Is this a sensitive product? Has it ever exceeded a G-force aspect? Confirmation of sale and start warranty timers around that. The other thing is you start to now have a new data set in this retail vendor partner relationship that says, hey, what % of volumes are leaving what stores at what time? And then how do you start to move pricing investment money or promotional money into markets that it really moves the needle more? So I can start to look at ROI on these types of different investments and say, if I've got a store marketing money and I'm distributing it across all stores on price, I may have stores that are actually out of stock and I don't know it because PI is so bad. So I just apply it universally versus putting more money into stores where maybe people are traveling further because they're in an electronics desert or a food desert, and they really need the stipend, and that will actually grow more sales. I work with some startups where we test this. It's like, hey, can I get people to go do an exercise for $1? Some places in California where they're walking up down the beach, if there's a store there, sure, they'll walk in and do it for $1, but they're not going to get in their car and drive, but they will for $5. Well, the same thing applies to product. Can I move short dated product? If the discount's deep enough, yes. So some stores, 10%, 20% might move the needle because she's shopping anyway, or he's shopping anyway, and I'm going to make hamburger tonight. But if I have to get in my car and go, I won't go for 20%, but I'll go for 50. And so now you're able to start to make these thresholds and know the quantity, know your actual spend, set a budget update for that, put it into finance, and then go quantify your sales versus markdown performance. And then all that, and this is the magical part, I think we just cut the long tail short. All that goes back into your forecast. Now your forecast gets smart because you're using real data as to price point, time, and action that drove sales. Then if you have any type of customer loyalty program or CRM where you're using, digital transaction information, what households will move at what price point. So now you know how to talk to your customers from a price relevancy perspective. And serialization enables all of that to the item level.
Yep. Practical example, grocery stores that bake bread, that product has a certain shelf life before you have to market it, and then you have to get rid of it. And by the way, I'm stealing this one from Chris Brown from TSC. He just shared this dynamic pricing based upon the item status. If it's just made, it's full price. If it's 3 or 4 days old or whatever what the day is, it automatically dynamically for that item, because we know what day it was made on, can mark it down for 25% off. So that ability to be able to leverage that unique serial number, it's not just UPC quantity price, it's a variable price based upon potentially the age of the product, right?
Correct. Which goes back to your point of state and status, right?
Yep.
The state of that bread is it's more than 2 hours old, and if we don't move it, we mark it down. We mark it's a write-off, right? So it's better to move it at 50% than to throw it away. And I think that's a great example.
I think it is a great example. And by the way, there's a lot of labor that goes into picking up each loaf of bread and looking at the date, which potentially goes away. I mean, maybe you just say, hey, if it's reached its day where we can sell it, we're going to automatically sell it for 25% less. We don't have to go mark each one down as a CVP, or Walmart used to call it CVP, but a markdown process. So great example, Chris. Great example. Another one that I think that is a pretty interesting example, and then we'll get into some of the hows. And from my standpoint, Myron, you and I have spent quite a bit of time, especially recently, kind of focusing against what I'm going to call the loss prevention, asset protection kind of space. I got an example here I'd love to get your reaction to, because you're hearing about organized retail crime. You're hearing about the fact that shrink is at an all-time high. Nobody knows exactly where the shrink comes from. But today, I'll give you an example. And Macy's, Joe Cole at Macy's has been very public about this, because it's all got unique serial numbers for every single item. And that's leveraging, frankly, RFID as the data capture. They're able to be able to look at what's sold at the register, obviously at the UPC level or G10 level, and take those UPCs and match them up against exits of items that are leaving. That's at the serialized level. And then in post, be able to say, here's what left the store that didn't get paid for. But here's the problem. What we're doing is we're trying to compare what's sold at the UPC or G10 level to the serial number. And if 5 left the store and 5 got paid for, we're in good shape. If none were paid for and 5 left the store, then they're all potentially a POS bypass. The challenge is if you sold 2 of them, but 4 of them left the store, which 2 didn't get paid for? We don't know. All we can do is match to a serial number. So how is actually serialization going? And by the way, some people are spending hardware to put RFID readers over point of sale. That has got some success, but it has some cost and obviously has some limitations. How is a unique serial number this particular problem that we've got?
Well, I think when you're able to leverage a serial number at point of sale and hold on to that serial number, and that's the key point, I think, of this data discussion with serialization, is you want to hold on to this number, because then you can keep track of when that number moved, when that number was scanned. And with Sunrise 2027, that obviously gives you interoperability between an RFID serial number and a barcode printed serial number. So I can have a tag on a pair of jeans and read it through the supply chain all the way out to the sales floor. And then I can monitor through POS by scanning the serialized barcode when it was scanned out at the register, and I know which ones were scanned, style, size, color. So when you have grouped assortments or standard assortments that are just, different sizes, different colors to a generic UPC, it's really a blind operation all the way back to sales and forecast. When you have serialization, you can actually track that information and know what sizes are being stolen, that walk out the door and get read, what sizes are being paid for, what styles that's happening to, is it a certain color that's happening to? So you can start to understand these different demand patterns and influence patterns. You can use that to reorder, but you can also use that to start looking at profiles within your store that could be based off of, I'll use a simple example here that just kind of tongue in cheek. If I've got Bentonville versus Rogers and I'm losing t-shirts, well, it's interesting because I'm losing black t-shirts in Bentonville and blue t-shirts in Rogers. But when I look at the region, I'm just losing t-shirts because black and blue's in this assortment group. But there's a differentiation because it's like, hey, there's a group that's taking black t-shirts because of the regional association of black t-shirts. And it could just be for fun, right? It could be a little, high school trick that they put that goes viral on TikTok that happens in the world today. But you're able to start understanding what's happening on a store-by-store basis. And then you can actually dig into further if you have different forms of computer vision in your store. So the interoperability between the serialization and other systems is tremendous. The ability to use the barcode when you need line of sight without putting new capital into your business. If you're changing out 20, 30, 40 front-end registers to RF, that's a big expense. It's also really hard to control the RF field of view, so you get overreads and different things. Using the barcode, we know that works. We know how to do that. People are trained well on that. That works with scan and go. That works with customer pickup orders. That works with a traditional cash register. So now I have a discrete point of sale view, and I can link other choke points in the store through that with any RF reader capability. In some cases, I may use optical where I'm scanning cases going out to the back room. Some companies scan their cases as they pick them from the back room. Well, through the case item hierarchy of GS1 standards, I can connect a case pack and know what serial numbers were put into that case from the manufacturer. So when I scan the case, I could know that those subordinate serial numbers are going to the sales floor. And then I know what I'm looking for at POS because of what's going to the sales floor. If I see something that goes through the register that hasn't moved to the sales floor, that could be a sign of an internal or organized theft situation where stuff is actually going out from the back room and not hitting the sales floor. So now I could know I need to look at employee profiles and things. And unfortunately that happens. So I think in this case, there's a lot to unpack and sit down and really kind of whiteboard these things. And it doesn't happen when you just bring in the technology. I bring in RFID or RFID tags. I bring in a serial number. You have to apply the data throughout your enterprise. And I love this conversation because this is some of the stuff that we've kind of talked and thought about over the years with folks is, hey, you can't take a serial number and convert it to a count and just keep PI the way you had it for the last 40 years. You've got to hold on to the serial numbers. Some of those serial numbers you'll want to keep longer than others. If I'm doing it on a bag of chips or produce or bakery, I may only need that number in history for 90 days because the life cycle of that product and turns are so high. But if I'm doing TV, electronics, and higher warranty items, I might want to keep that for a year. So now my data storage starts to become a little dynamic based off of those profiles as well.
Yep. 100%. And even with this example right here, I've got a situation where I'm matching a G10 to an SG10, and I'm going to get it wrong because there's kind of a one-to-many relationship. You talked about that 2D barcode, and I think in the future, we're going to look at something that looks much more like this, which is we're going to not put a UPC on the product. We're going to put a 2D barcode. And that's the unique serial number. That unique UPC and serial number combination is what's going to be scanned. And to your point, if they just throw away that serialized data, which they probably be very easy to do because all they want is a UPC to look up the price, they lose the opportunity to say what actually left the store versus what actually got sold at the serialized level. You throw away that opportunity. So you're 100% right. Here's the challenge. If I'm a retailer or a supplier, et cetera, my entire platform, my legacy system has been built on UPC quantity. This is the tough part, Myron. How in the world do you fundamentally change the legacy systems to incorporate this unique serial number? Number one, it's a whole lot more data. Number two, how do I think about transmitting that throughout the supply chain? Because we've always been UPC quantity based. How do you make that transition? Because that's not trivial.
No, it's not trivial, and a great person in this space, and you know him well, John Phillips. He and I used to have some just passionate conversations on this topic because, if you take, beverages like Pepsi or Coke or something like that, or bags of chips and snacks, the volume on those, it's tremendous. And the thought of serializing that, if I sell one can of take your favorite beverage, I sell one can 1 million times a day. Well, that's one line of data with a quantity tracker of 1 million on it.
Right.
If I serialize that, that's suddenly 1 million lines of data.
Yep.
If I serialize that by 20 different read points, it's 20 million lines of data, right? Or I've got extended fields in the database. They're smarter guys than me to figure out the database structure. But the multiplier is tremendous. But I don't need to hold that for a year. I might be able to look at ways to do hot and cold storage of that. I think this is where there needs to be a lot more mind exercises in it. But there's also things that start to happen with, hey, where does that stuff end up? Do I have people crossing, legal contracts on bottling rights and things that I don't have visibility to it today? So I think the use cases get very different as you move through different product codes. The complexities are very different based off volumes. And some companies do serialize, right? The TVs, the computers, the phones, Apple, Samsung, et cetera. They do a lot of that already. So I could link this serial number to my product manufacturer serial number, and now I have a direct correlation to all the piece parts. We've seen the airlines do some of this as well. Database architecture, I think edge databases are going to become a big thing in clearing houses on some of these elements that says, when do I care about this? I think you'll see AI, generative AI at the edge. This is a slow, methodical move because the data out there is not good today. But as the data gets better, the ability to put edge AI in a generative method out in space and start looking at the performance of serial numbers, hey, these are very consistent with a normal pattern. We can start to dump those into cold storage for 30 days. Hey, these are questionable. We want to watch this for a return at another store because it didn't follow the normal travel path. And then these are, hey, this is an alert. We need some sort of action. Are we triggering video to capture additional information here so we can build a case on a potential organized crime and tying that together? So I think the sophistication of that, what you see in retail inventory markets across all the activities that happen, and those are directly connected to the financial markets. I think you'll see the retail inventory markets start to mirror more of the financial traceability markets, because at the end of the day, the financial markets are a subset of what happens in some of these retail wholesale product markets. It's the asset that's moving and causing the financial ability. If we start tracking the asset, we can get more insights to the financial crimes that are happening in the background as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So practically, if I think about the way the retail supply chain works, items are set up, purchase orders are built. I need 50 of these, and I want them delivered to this location. That's at the UPC level. And then advanced shipment notifications are, I shipped the 50, and the invoicing, I want to be paid for the 50, and it flows through the supply chain. Now I've got this whole other piece of data, which is, I have the 50 or million Pepsi cans. I thought it was probably a better example. Does that go through traditional kind of EDI platforms? I've heard a lot about this thing called EPCIS from GS1. Practically, we have to way of be able to store that data and assign those attributes to it as an individual company. But more importantly, how do we communicate across the supply chain in a common way? Is EPCIS the right way? Is EDI the right way? How do we think about that?
So that's a big question. I think there's some room in this space for some work groups. We have EPCIS, which can certainly do this. The problem is it becomes a lot more transactions, and you're defining where you want the serialized data in the man segment of the ASN. I think there's a lot more opportunity for machine-to-machine communication here that says, hey, here's your PO, we're saying it's full, and here's the serial numbers we read in that. Can the vendor-supplier relationship have a machine-to-machine view that says, okay, our machine's going to look at your finalized outbound bill of lading, and we're going to match our receiving invoice to that, and we'll get a green off of that match. So I can store it in a partner location. Maybe the vendor stores that record and the receiver looks up against it. In a direct relationship, that works. In an indirect relationship, there has to be an intermediary that's capturing that, maybe it's 3PL. But I think this is where groups like GS1 really strive in getting industry together to talk about, okay, how should this relationship work? Does everybody need a physical copy, or can we do virtual copy? And we work with virtual servers and virtual databases for a long, long time. So I think the Microsoft, Dells, Amazons of the world can play in this space as well. to help define, hey, what's the most efficient way to do this? And then sort of your business action groups start looking at it and saying, hey, financially that works because we may do an assumed receipt anyway. So there's lots of things depending on the contract relationships that this can be done without having to replicate all that data at every location.
Yeah.
But there's a lot more to discuss there. I don't think that's a silver bullet that anybody has their arms around because just not enough people are looking at it at this high of level.
Yeah, I know there was. I think you were involved as well. There was a major study by Auburn University several years ago called the CHIP project, the Chain Integration Project, and that it was a nice way of saying that there's a big bucket of money called claims. Claims are basically saying, I asked for 50 of these shirts and you only sent 40, so I'm going to claim or I'm going to deduct that from my invoice. There was a product authentication. Hey, am I really paying for Nike shoes, or are these a ripoff, et cetera? It's potentially, pharmaceuticals. Is it really made from the manufacturer? Do I have that trust? And we really, I think everybody rallied around it. There were some huge numbers that were shown, et cetera, but I still haven't seen a real practical, hey, I am a retailer, I'm a supplier, I ordered 50 of these, you shipped me 45, and I can tell you that I didn't get them all. Well, yeah, you did. Here's the 50 SG10s that I sent you, the unique serial numbers I sent you. Go scan if you've got them, you got them. I'm not paying the deduction because the reality is you just didn't catch them on the read, but you did get them. So it's the ability to be able to, basically debate or throw data against claims or shrink or product authentication issues, et cetera. But again, we're several years in since that study, and I think the industry is still struggling with a way of doing this.
I think they're struggling, but I think, at least from my seat, I'm seeing companies actually want to study that. And I think this is, unfortunately, it's a topic that nobody wants to be public about. It's a little bit like inventory when we first started that in like 2007, 2005, because nobody wants to admit that there's inventory is 60% accurate, because how do I answer a question at a Goldman Sachs conference or to Wall Street about that number? Because I don't have an answer. I think the same thing is, hey, I've got situations where the vendor intentionally shipped me short because it was on time in full or whatever it may be, and I'd rather have something there than nothing there, because I can't sell nothing. I can sell 70% of the order and make up the difference. I've seen cases documented where, unfortunately, some suppliers or intermediaries have substituted a cheap product for a more expensive product and didn't change the box labeling or the bill of lading. And so there's 200 units of the wrong item shipped in the wrong box that are going to flow through a DC and down to the store. And now I've got 400 units of error because I'm over and under, right? So it doubles. And that was done intentionally because of the pressure of business in a post-COVID supply chain. And it's like, hey, I think we can get away with it because we don't think anybody's looking. That's bad business in all aspects, but how do you find that? Well, it doesn't show up till it's at the store, and then we're post auditing, and then are we going to open every box on every truck? Barcodes have got us to a place where we're not really wanting to do that. The serialization with EPC starts to give you the capability to do that free audit check and to do that green lighting of a PO and say, hey, this one's clear to pay, everything looks great, or hey, we're going to keep this one open on 5 units, so we'll pay everything but 5, but we've got 28 days on our terms to look for those 5. If they show up, we'll release the rest of the funds. If they don't, we'll file a claim. I think it makes business more transparent as to what's going on. And it's the pressure of human conversations that sometimes we don't want to have because we don't have an answer, that the data, like this data, serialized data at this level, can tell us, hey, we're just short, but we're working on it. Or, hey, we didn't see it, but we're actively looking for it because I've got a system that's actively looking for it. I'm not having to pull a cashier off a register to try to go look for something that they don't know where it is, which is sort of a failure task to begin with. So I think we're getting there. People are starting to wrap their head around it. I think, economics always play into this. You have to have some use cases and some audits on the ground to quantify that there's value there. I think CHIPS started that. It opened the door. But then it's like, okay, well, which of these 5 issues that Chip identified do I have? And some companies have 1 or 2, some have 5. But they've got to understand how good or bad they are in their own eyes and how they start to attack that without wrecking their company. So you're kind of doing open heart surgery on the company while the company is awake. And that's a sensitive space to play.
Yep.
And you want to be great, but you also don't want to set a separate precedent for yourself. And that's just the hard part about being CEOs of big companies. Sometimes you can do something that puts a target on your back. So I think this has traction over the next 10, 15 years as we look at the leverage from the data. Again, if you go back to the barcode, we're celebrating 50 years of the barcode,
yep.
which was developed to sell product.
Mm-hmm.
Look at all the things we do with barcodes, all the things in shipping and containers and tracking and medicine and documents and files and records, and now 2D barcodes and menus. Nobody thought we'd be ordering food off a 2D barcode at a restaurant, right? But we're doing it. So I think we're still learning things from the barcode. Serialization will be 50 years plus of learnings in a much faster timeline.
Yeah. I was going to say that's about the only thing that came out of COVID. We all learned how to scan a 2D barcode for a menu.
Yeah, unfortunately now my TV screen's covered half the time with the QR code too. So.
That's a good point. That is a great point. That's a great point. Well, we got a few minutes left, and we've had a couple of questions, and I think we've answered them. So I'm not going to go back into those. Give us the so what. I mean, what are the actual questions? What are the questions that I didn't ask that I should have? I mean, where are we going with this thing? Where do you see the next 2 to 3 to 5 to 10 years? I mean, you mentioned some of this stuff. What exactly should we be thinking about if I'm a retailer or I'm a supplier? How do I now I know what serialized data is? I know some of those potential use cases. How do I get involved to get more actively involved and start thinking about and actually implementing some of these solutions?
I think there's kind of a decision tree is starting to look at, hey, what are the biggest value points I can get out of serialization in my business, and finding those nuggets, sort of like companies did with sustainability, right? It took some pushing, and people found real value in sustainability at the economic level, not just the moral level of the company. I think finding those nuggets for serialization on both the internal operations and the customer satisfaction experience and sales side. Partnering with groups, GS1, having an active proponent in GS1, looking at the information, learning about that. I think learning from groups like Auburn, Michigan State, and others around these organizations that have labs that look at things in a very independent view, and talking with solution providers, like what are they doing, what are they offering, bringing to the table solutions, and what use cases can they share to get educated. And I think have a team that's on your tech side looking at, hey, if we move to serialization and keep the serial number and the event trackers, what do we need to do from a data architecture perspective? So the architect teams need to be really involved. And how do we best manage that and then be able to recall that information for business value? And then start to think of it strategically. This is a transformation. It is not a project. A lot of RFID things were, well, it's a project. We're going to put tags on product. I'm like, yeah, that's step one. Like, what are you going to do with it after that? That's the transformational strategy. So I think now that we have Sunrise 2027 and this becomes a barcode, RFID, other potential symbology capability, I'm looking at how do I put serialization to work in my business? The same way that companies like, I think it's interesting because fast retailing's done some of this. Dillard's, they had a serialize, and others did this. They put these yellow stickers on that serialized the transaction. They scanned it after the sale. They scanned the G10 and scanned the serial number, and that was sort of their proof of purchase tracker, almost like a POS transaction log, and that gave them, non-receipt refunds or verifiable of purchase. So I think they've done serialization in a way that's not connected to RFID or this GS1 Sunrise initiative, and they've done that for years. So I think there's companies that have done it and done it very well in a different way. It doesn't all have to be the same way. But once you think about serialization, you want to make sure you're reserving enough space for how big is the serial number on an RFID tag? Am I using the same serial number or something different on a QR code? How do I cross-reference those? Thinking about the architecture in a way that allows you to use that universally and then move faster than barcodes did into a machine-to-machine engagement. And then it becomes, hey, a business case for GS1 is, hey, you did chip. Now we really want to look at how do we reconcile this information and what's the most effective way to do that as subscribers to this industry standards organization. They're very responsive to business interest. And so if the businesses start showing interest in that, I think they can really accelerate EPCAS, which is a really big blockchain model, and other ways to do those types of active queries. But it's getting in the game and allowing people in your organization and challenging people in your organization to think about what would we need to do different systemically if everything we scanned was serialized.
Exactly. Interesting.
And I think that's the challenge question of today, is to get people to start having that discussion in 2024.
Yeah. Yeah. Nope. I think that makes sense. I mean, and the early adopter of this, obviously from 2003, RFID as a technology sort of led the way, because it almost had to be. If you're going to scan something, you got to have a unique serial number to know how many times did I count you. You can't just count UPCs, because I'd never be able to do it right. But we still haven't made that leap from that to, we're sort of going up that pyramid to starting with inventory accuracy, then finding product in the store, then asset protection. We're still, for the most part, inside the store. Love to see us get into the upstream supply chain. That's what CHIP was all about. But unfortunately, we are not where I think, where I was hoping we would be. I thought we would be farther along. And there's some great companies that have worked on it. It's just hard. It's a lot of difficult stuff to get through.
I think it's hard. And I think when I look back at most of those programs, which have been great for moving the needle in the EPC RFID space, and some in the 2D barcode space. And I, full transparency, I sit on an innovation advisory board for GS1 still, and we talk about these things with multiple industry partners in the board. Is most of those projects were around very much about, hey, inventory because we're chasing supply chain with COVID, inventory because we're inaccurate and we're disappointing customers. But most of those, the serial number gets dropped off to account because the architecture discussion didn't happen with the EPC project. They were disconnected. Yeah. And I think the learning for me over the years has been, if you don't bring the serial number through the enterprise, there's a point where it doesn't matter if you had the serial number or not. You're putting a bit of a Band-Aid on a problem, but you're not able to rectify the problem because it's not going into your forecast, because you're dumping off the intelligence that you had and converting it to just a 0 or a +1 or -1. And so I think that's the biggest learning over the years for me, is serialization is an enterprise transformation project. I spent a lot of time at NRF talking with a lot of the enterprise companies on forecasting and WMS and ERP systems. And I was asking this, hey, how's your company thinking about serialization? And everybody's like, don't know if we have that discussion, and that person's definitely not here, but let's follow up. Yeah. And so, even me just kind of poking the bear a little bit, it's kind of like, hey, we got to do a better job of raising the awareness on this. And so I think, kudos to you and Matt for pulling this together, because I think it's a discussion that kind of sneaks up on people. But I think it's a really important discussion, because I think our future of product identity, whether it's barcodes or RFID or something else, is in a serialized world. It won't be a big bang theory. Everything won't happen at the same time. Things will happen at different speeds. But if it starts happening, it's going to happen across the supply chain, because we can't run multiple protocols very well for very long.
Yeah. Yeah. When we get this transition, success looks like we don't have a data serialization project or a 2D barcode project or an RFID project. They're woven into the factory. Nobody has UPC projects in companies anymore. It's foundational, like electricity and water come into a house, right? It's foundational. We're just not there yet. We got to get enough case studies where people say, this is just going to be all like electricity. We got to make the investment for the infrastructure to be able to do this. Then the use cases make it much easier, because right now the project seems it's plowing new ground, I think.
It is, but gosh, you triggered my memory, which is getting harder to do these days. I think I believe you and I actually sat on a supply chain steering committee, cross-functional, years ago with Ken Boyd and some different folks from other partners in the supplier space. And we talked about what barcodes should be used in the supply chain on cases and what types of things should we be doing. And it became an influencing community. And I think we've lost a lot of those communities over the years. And that might be something that we need to try to resurrect with partnership from GS1 and AIM and the grocery, GMA. Those groups, I think, have a lot of power to pull teams together, but I think having willing participants in the teams to have the discussion and get people to sit around the table and talk about it once or twice a year is really powerful. And I think we've lost a little bit of that over the years. So maybe it's time we resurrect some history around that.
Well, we were on a call this morning, and I can't tell you who I was on the call with because that would be inappropriate, but it was all about the Food Safety Modernization Act 204, which basically says by 2026 with food, you've got to have traceability and identification, et cetera. And it's all the way through the supply chain. And everybody was like, well, everybody can do it their own way. I go, well, that makes no sense at all. I mean, if you're going to do this, I would think people like Chipotle and McDonald's and Walmart and Kroger and et cetera would all get in a room and go, what's the best way to do this? It's all lock arms and say, that's the best way to do this. That's not collusion. That's not antitrust. It's creating a standard way things happen, because then adoption by the supplier community and collaboration makes much more easy versus everybody's going to try to do it their own way. I agree with you. I think there has been there's been a lot of really great standards, but there hasn't been a lot of, hey, there's a lot of standards that gives us a lot of choices, but how are we going to execute the FSMA work for 2004 across the retail supply chain? I think everybody's going to kind of struggle with that.
Yep.
Myron, as always, wonderful job. Thank you so much. It's always enjoyable to touch base with you. Any parting thoughts? Any ways that your company can help some of the companies who are struggling with it?
Well, we're always willing to help. I think I'll part with this thing I think you'd asked me about in our pre-discussion. On my website, I have this quote around open input and debate are critical elements to creating strategic direction of a business. But more importantly, if we all around the table agree, then most of us aren't necessary.
Great point.
And I think sometimes we find ourselves in meetings where it's kind of like, yeah, I don't want to create any friction. I don't necessarily agree, but I don't want to be that person. And I think we've got to have the boldness to be able to ask questions and challenge each other and have an active professional debate. It's not personal. It's not full disagreement. It's just, hey, is this the right thing? Hey, are we thinking about this? What are we going to do? Why are we getting rid of this data? What are we going to do when we need it? That helps people make better decisions and better planning. And that's, part of the name of my company is Divergent, because we try to think about things differently. We think more with the end in mind versus the initial project or the bogey on the P&L to go get. We want to get those things, but we want to help people do it in a way that helps set them up for the future and not adds cost of rework or tech debt as they go down the pathway. So always happy to help. Sometimes it's just lending an ear and listening to people or giving them like, hey, why would you think of it that way type of challenge. But I think a lot of these things, these will be solved in collaboration with smart groups and people who want to be leaders in the space, or maybe some have a tremendous amount of serialized inventory in their stores and they're trying to figure out, wait, why am I not realizing as much value as I expected? Well, how are you treating the data? And usually that's a question that yields a lot of fruit. So it's always a pleasure, Mike. And Matt, thank you all for the time. And to the audience, thank you all for attending and all the things you do. And if we can help in any way, we're certainly happy to do that.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, Matt and Myron. I appreciate it very much. Incredible discussion, and it will not be the last time we have a discussion with you. It's always provocative. It's thinking through it. It's challenging our thinking. And to your point, there is an opportunity to be disagreeing without being disagreeable, because I think if 10 of us are all in the same room and we all have the same thoughts, then some of us don't need to be here. It's okay to have a conflicting, points of view. And I think that makes us stronger because I don't think you just take one person's answer and drive down the road with it. So thank you very much, Matt. Thank you very much, Myron. We appreciate it. And appreciate the audience for participating. Take care.